Wonderful, wonderful. You have a whole wealth of experience, and I'm really impressed with, especially you have a great beginning, and of course, looking at a continental kind of difference, you were able to really adapt well with Africa. Maybe you can share some tips with those who are hesitant about visiting Africa later. All right, so the second question I have for you, you seem to have answered two of my questions already. I don't know how you do it, but you gave a wonderful summary of your what inspired you to, moving into the AI space. But the question I have for you has to do with a moment in your early work with the Safe Motors and OLPC you mentioned. Uh, I mean, a moment that kind of planted the seeds for what you do now at InfiniteUp.
A moment that planted the seeds for what I'm doing now at InfiniteUp. Well, like I would say that at Safe Motos, so I feel like many people, I'm sure who are like part of your audience, are really into startups, right? But I feel like every couple of years there's like a new generation of startups. And like say like the original kind of like startups, well, like the ones that like kind of made its name big is like, Yahoo, Google, like things like this, like coming out of somebody's garage. And these businesses were really easy because you could just like literally like throw a server on and like you could kind of like scale infinitely with negligible difference in terms of unit economics. You're like selling like digital boxes, right? But then I feel like it was like all this like Uber, WeWorks, job tech stuff where I feel like almost like retrospectively, they might not be remembered as tech enabled startups. Rather, they're traditional companies that are using technology tools. So, say something like Uber, right? If you go from 10 trips a day to a billion trips a day, obviously it's going to be different logistics. And that is something that I feel like actually kind of goes against what I believe in as technology. Another example is that, like, say you build a great ride hailing system or on demand food delivery in Lagos, it doesn't necessarily make it any better in Accra or Sydney or Tokyo. So I've actually kind of like, I looked at this stuff and I was going, well, like, frankly, like, it's too much work to like make these sort of companies happen. Like, that's like, like backbreaking to try to like go figure out how I do like 100 million trips, a year in Kinshasa. And it doesn't seem to me to be about what technology should be about. So I read this
Mhm.
amazing growth hackers guide on like the founding of WhatsApp. WhatsApp, what it was worth like $11 billion or something when it got by Facebook. It was only 12 people and it was just doing something small amazingly well, and it could be trans-border and infinitely scalable. And I think that's to me like what technology is about, like being trans-border and infinitely scalable. No network effects, not needing anything else, just like, like a magic lamp that we're digitally printing. So I decided that if I'm doing another company again, well, I want to do a better business model than like following, like, I thought if I did Uber, I'd be good because they're so successful. And it's almost like, wait, like this was their plan the entire time? Like, are they a bit slow? Um, but now what I'm doing is like, $12 a month for our basic, $250 a month for our executive white glove treatment. Same prices everywhere in the world. You don't just pay by any card, and you don't need any ecosystem. You don't need any other users for the app to be valuable. You just go in, and for us, if it's 10 users or 10 billion users, it's the same. Though I'd be curious of how we have more than the population of Earth. But like, I think that's what technology should be about. Um, so that's how I got here, I guess.
Barrett, each time I listen to you speak, right from the Guinness World Record attempt by Tom Cruise for the longest interviewed marathon, where you spoke a lot on AI, I really do enjoy you talking about the future. Of course, you've lived and worked across different countries, but my question is very simple. How has it been? How has being in all these continents and countries really immersed your your view. Let me put it this way. Maybe let me restructure it because this is really an interesting question. You've lived and you've worked in across, let's say, different countries from Rwanda to Congo to Canada to US. How has being immersed in the emerging global markets kind of shaped your understanding of innovation? Because you're a very innovative person.
Well, I'm actually in Tbilisi, Georgia right now, so I'm currently bordered by Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, the Black Sea, and Russia. Um, but I
Wow.
believe that Albert Einstein had this concept he called combinatorial creativity, which is like actually some great breakthroughs happen not by people who are in their sphere of expertise, but other by people who are outside of their sphere of expertise, kind of like experimenting because they're not blocked to the thinking around you. So, say like for an example, in Canada, nobody was using WhatsApp. Everybody was using SMS text messages. And I was always using WhatsApp in Africa. It was something that like I would never even thought of it because I'd not imagined it. But by seeing how superior it is, that suddenly I started using it. And now, like, say, like I've got many people in Canada use it now, but it's like you can't go back once you see it. Another example is like motorcycle taxis, right? In Canada, you don't use motorcycle taxis. And like, I would have to wake up in the morning, go down to the bus stop, go like, wait for the bus, go get hopped off, dropped off, transfer the bus, move over, the bus is late, where like, whoa, like I could just like get a motorcycle and be like, take me wherever I want. And it's very affordable. I think that there's something for, like everywhere you go, keeping like your eyes kind of fresh for what are things that like work, really nice and really well that might be missing in some other place. And then it's almost like, like a lot of being an entrepreneur isn't even needing to like think of something fresh. It's more like what's something that like works really well somewhere else that just kind of hasn't arrived yet that we could do or we could like leverage that type of thing. But I do believe also like, just being always kind of like outside of your bubble, like pushing your own personal boundaries. Like when stay in your neighborhood for your entire life, you're limited by the people around you. And like, say Emmanuel, like it's a wonderful thing talking to you. We come from, very different places, but like, it's a pleasure to talk. And I think like this is what knowledge sharing is about. And I feel like all day, a big thing though is having a task list. I keep like a task list on my phone because, actually like sometimes like the problem is not lack of inspiration, lack of creative spark, but rather there's always so many, but you just got to write it down and actually like do something with them.